And welcome to the start of the last day of the conference. Our session today is about a framework for assessing the value of research data. And before we start, we of course also would like to acknowledge and celebrate the first Australians on whose traditional lands we meet, and we pay our respect to the elders past and present. You saw that already. I guess you have all gotten in, but we really would like to ask you to go to our session notes and register your attendance, but actually also we very much hope that you can leave any feedback, any questions, any knowledge you have of related initiatives in our session notes, because we would very much like to use this session today to collect your input and to collect your knowledge on the area. Yes. I think before we start, we introduce ourselves. My name is Susanne Boer, and I'm from the Netherlands, but I live and work in Copenhagen, Denmark. I'm an executive advisor in research data management at the University of Copenhagen, where I mostly work on strategy and policy related initiatives, but also training, support coordination. I have a background as an evolutionary biologist before that. Pedro, do you want to?
And my name is Pedro Hernández. I'm Mexican based in the Netherlands. I'm the coordinator of data stewardship services at Maastricht University, and also very much involved in different research data management boards in the country, in the Netherlands. And kicking off the collaboration.
Yeah. So, what we want to do today is first and foremost have a very interactive session. We hope the two of us will take turns presenting some content to you of some activities we're involved in, but other than that, we really very much hope to have a lively discussion and have a debate going, and I will explain a little bit later also why. But in short, all your input is going to be taken along in our future work. So we'll start with a bit of an introduction on why we're here today, at least why in Denmark we are interested in this topic. Then we would like to pick your brain through some Mentimeter questions. Pedro will continue and show a little bit about how data value is addressed in data management policies. We would like to show you some very preliminary results from our Danish project. And then I brought a case where we have to relate to value that I really would like to discuss with you. And hopefully also you have some of your own use cases that you could bring up. So to start, why are we in Denmark? So where I live and where I work, why are we interested in data value? Well, there's a whole bunch of reasons for that, but one of the reasons is that we are increasingly being asked in high-level documents to relate to value, not just our researchers, but also us as institutions. And I just brought 3 examples to showcase that. For example, our Danish Code of Conduct for Research Integrity says that when researchers make decisions regarding long-term preservation, they have to take the value of their primary materials or data into account in the way they can help assess the results of the research, and researchers should also take the physical and technical possibilities of storage at the institutions into account. So here our code of conduct refers to value as something, data value in relation to the potential to support research conclusions, and it also has something to do about the cost or the resources needed for storing data. Another type of document, we have a lot of focus on research security in our country, I guess in the whole world, but also with us. So we had a national committee that came up with guidelines for international cooperation in research and innovation, and they stated that research institutions may hold data that is unique and in demand globally, or research that is close to a breakthrough in the field. It is the institution's particularly valuable research that others may have an interest in obtaining, and this research should be identified and protected. So also here a reference to value, but value in connection to a global demand, something about the scientific value, and if there has been an identified value, then you need to safeguard this. So another mention of value, basically asking researchers to identify valuable research, but again a slightly different angle. And then really a quite different type of example from legislation. Our Danish executive order on the reuse of public sector information says that the Minister of Finance shall lay down further rules on high-value datasets that must be free of charge, machine-readable and accessible. So again, again a reference to value, but implied that this is something a stakeholder can make a decision on what's valuable or not, and once it has been deemed valuable, it should be accessible and reusable. So just 3 examples from really high-level documents that we at the universities have to work with. References to value, but not, of course, no one-size-fits-all definitions of what value is. It's kind of left a little bit in the middle, even though there's kind of hints into which direction we should interpret this. But this is something we wanted to work further on in our country. So what's happening with us since a couple of years, we have a Danish national strategy for the implementation of the FAIR principles. And to follow that work, we have 6 national working groups whose task it is to look at what the 8 universities in our country are doing to implement FAIR. And one of these working groups has been tasked to follow how universities work with the concept of value. Well, we very quickly found out that none of the 8 universities are actually in a structured way addressing value. So that was a little bit hard. Our initial assignment was to follow, but instead we decided that our goal would be to kind of investigate and perhaps define what research data value could mean, what criteria there are for value, and that various stakeholders apply in order to manage their research data, basically. So, and if we had to kind of narrow the scope a little bit, we in our project wanted to focus on digital data managed as part of research activities at the Danish universities. Funnily enough, I've brought a case that's about physical samples at the end of this session. So I think in the end, similar principles apply. But we for now have decided to stick to digital data, and we want to look at the value of data in the context of decision-making when managing data throughout the data lifecycle. And I just want to illustrate what I mean with that. Here you can see the Danish University of Copenhagen's data lifecycle, our branded version, I guess, of a data lifecycle. And if you go through this data lifecycle, this project lifecycle, there are many different points in the project where some considerations regarding data value are appropriate, right? So in the planning phase, if you want to reuse already existing data, you may need to assess, is this data of value for the research question that I want to address? When you want to store and secure the data, what approach to storage is necessary, what storage costs are acceptable, and what level of protection is appropriate to safeguard the data. Also here value comes in. The assumption, I guess, is when the more valuable you think your data is, the more protection you want to put on it. But then the very obvious things like, can data be commercialized? Should data be preserved? Can the data actually impact my reputation as data provider when I make them available? So there are multiple points where data value assessment is relevant. So we kind of want to go through a project life cycle and investigate how value is being assessed at these points. And then, of course, it's very obvious from the 3 examples that I showed you in the beginning that what value is very much depends on who you ask. What a researcher thinks is valuable, research leadership may not think is valuable, and the other way around, right? So if we go back to this life cycle, and we put some labels on, stakeholder labels, and this is just an exercise I did, may not be 100%, you may want to argue with me otherwise, but just as for illustration purposes, I think for most of these decisions, researchers will at least have an opinion. But some of these decisions, for example, regarding the level of protection, we will have our information security officers that have some view on what should be protected, what is valuable, and that way. When we talk about storage costs, right, we have IT departments that may also have an idea, or the head of the university has ideas. At my university, we're actually running out of storage space at the moment. which means that the IT staff now has to find out. They are trying to introduce payment models for storage, and now this question of what should be kept, what should be discarded becomes very relevant. Now researchers actually have to pay for it. So again, different stakeholders have different opinions on value depending on the type of question you want to answer. That's a bit our hypothesis. So what we want to do is develop a framework that can help define the value of data. And the word framework is a little bit loose because we don't yet know what our end product could look like, but a helpful tool for different stakeholders to manage assessments of data value. And we also, of course, want to have a first description of cases that could benefit from such a framework. Yes, and before I go into some very first results that we have, I would like to ask you what you think about value before we kind of dive into the topic. How did I do that? Alt-tab, was that it? Yeah. And Pedro, I think my Mentimeter has disappeared now. Oh no, it's there. And then I had to do, okay, it's here, great. Oh, I actually, well, it would have been easy if I would show you the Mentimeter slide. Which one? Sorry, I have to go back to the presentation. Don't know where the presenter view went. Here. Sorry. If you could go to Menti and log in with this code, that would help, that information, I guess. You got in. Do you get in? Yes. Great. That succeeded at least. A bit technically challenged sometimes. Let's see. Here. Yeah. Yeah. So first, of course, the always returning basic questions on where are you employed? That was not the question. Go back.
The first question. That's the second.
Is this the second? Weird. Sorry about that. Really?
Oh no, that's all right. No, they're just included in our interface.
Oh, that is super handy.
Too for some reason. Yeah. You're good.
Yeah. If I go back to present. Can you see this on your screen now? Yeah. Sorry. So I don't normally work with Menti. Maybe you have guessed that. Those of you who wrote other, can I ask how you define your type of organization? Yeah?
This is Katie Cannon from CSIRO. I would say that we are a publicly funded research agency.
Okay.
We're not government.
Other examples? I think this you can maybe, just yell out loud. It's okay.
Public research institute outside of an university.
Okay. So, other types of research organizations, basically. Okay, so next question. And I guess you have already had access to that question then. So what is your role? So we were not successful in, I guess, identifying all sorts of different roles, but... I'll keep that. Has everyone answered? Yeah. Great. So now the open questions start. So in your role, are there situations where you have to think about the value of research data? If so, please describe that situation to us. So when is data value a part of your life, work life? Yeah, so in context of preservation, cleaning up the repository, also Great. Oh, it's fundamental to what we do. My organization helps others maximize the value of their research data. Who said that? Can you say something about that? Sorry, can we hear a little bit about what that means?
So my name's Kevin Ashley. I'm from the Digital Curation Centre in the UK, and we're a service organisation that we provide services to everything from people doing data management planning, but to consultancy and training about open research, but really focused on seeing data as an asset rather than as a burden.
Yeah, great.
And therefore understanding the value of data and helping organisations to appreciate that is one way of getting them to take care of it.
That's such a good point. Thank you. Yeah, I also can see protection of potential commercial value according to university policy. So is there an IPR specialist here, or who said that with the commercial value? I think that was also very interesting. Yeah? Just want to hear more about that.
Hi, so I'm Judith. I work with the Belgian National Research Funding Agency, but also with universities, and as a data steward in universities, I am required, sort of mandated by the IP office in my university to talk about data as part of the value in sense of the commercial sense to researchers when during like entry-level trainings and everything. And sometimes I feel a little bit uncomfortable with that, but I guess it has to be part of the question. Yeah. So I'm not an IPR specialist at all. It's just that my university worries about it.
It's part of your package to communicate about. Yeah, I don't know. I can actually scroll back up. I don't know if I can. Oops, no. Then I go to. But yeah, great. I like that. Thanks a lot. Many different comments. So and also I see a lot of in relation to preservation, but also publishing, cleaning up storage infrastructure. So different types of examples. So I think you are already spreading a little bit around my data lifecycle, and I'm going to use this feedback to actually populate my lifecycle a little bit more. That's super interesting. So now a question. Give me some examples of data sets that you believe are high in value. I don't want to have any reasons for why they're high, just examples of data sets. So they can be internationally recognized data sets or a description of a data set that you have in your institution that you think is a high value.
Or in a broader sense, data resource, database, data biobank.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. I have no clue what that means, but we can in situ Earth observations. Great. The human genome.
Exactly those examples. Yeah.
Perfect. I don't have examples. Well, that's also fair enough. Data linked from the journal's paper, data availability statements, or anything underlying conclusions. Heritage data, so old data. Big data. Unrepeatable observations. Yeah. Great. Anything someone wants to use. Also fair point. Of course, there's a point to me asking. I don't know, have you gotten rid of all of your examples already? I want to move on to the next question. Do you then have examples of data sets that you think have low value?
Is it ever possible? Right? Is it ever possible that research data has low value?
Yeah, data lacking. Menti survey responses. Well. They will be very useful for our project. Some modeling outputs raw data of a measurement that did not work. Easily replicable. Of course, we are already starting to see some factors that you believe influence data value. Early COVID data. Who said early COVID data? I would like to know why you think this has low value. Who said that? No one? we can leave it. It's fine as well. Low quality data with no provenance. Yeah, you're kind of already saying, you are basically already giving the factors away, I think. Data lacking metadata. Yeah, so of course now, untrustworthy data. I'm liking this. It's going to, well, I now would like to know, so okay, now we have seen some examples of what you think is high value data sets versus examples of what you think is low value data sets. So if you have to describe what gives data its value, what would that be, in your opinion? What factors, what is it that gives data its value? Rich metadata, so the way it's described. Making it fair so that it's accessible and reusable. Well organized, usefulness, that's of course depending on who the audience is to reuse it. Relevance. Yeah, unrepeatable work, so something, data that you can't get again. The value, the markets set, also a very good point. The cost to get and recreate the data. Community needs, use, yeah. Metadata for context. Yeah, so I can see a lot about characteristics about the data set itself, but there's also something about the way we use the data sets or make the data sets available for reuse. Yes, great. Data that underpins publication, so are the basis of results. Value to whom? Yeah. Super. I'm very happy with that list. We will actually go and talk about it later. So for now, this was just for me to collect some input and for us to kind of visualize that, but we'll talk about that later. I now want to give the word to you, where Pedro will tell us a little bit about how value appears in policies.
All right. So I guess, you know, we've been discussing like on a high level, on a theoretical level, what value is and what gives value, and value is important for whom. So what we did in Maastricht University was to look for evidence, was to literally look to, you know, to documents, to research data management policies, and see if we can see some sort of definitions of value and how is value mentioned under what context. So we collected 142 so far publicly accessible policies on research data management around the world. The next step was, in order to analyze all that text, because at the end of the day, yeah, well, those are documents, you need to read them. In order to see where the value is mentioned, we need to break it down into pieces. In order to break it down into pieces, we thought of, okay, better we make all these PDFs and Word documents and university websites into machine-readable text. Once we have the, you know, all the text in machine-readable format, what we can do now in order to, yeah, ask the question, where is value mentioned? A very common technique in information science is the chunking mechanism, right? So you take a number of tokens or you take a number of sections and you chunk it, you break it into pieces. So now we have, from the 142 policies, more than 2,000 different chunks, right? Pieces of text from the size of a paragraph. And then from all those 2,000 different chunks, we're going to filter value. Which of those chunks have any value mentioned? From that value mentioned, we narrow it down to 146 chunks or paragraphs, 200 tokens in average, more or less, that mention value. To give you, more context about that filtering, the filtering mechanism, the search term of value includes all the conjugations and derivations of value, right? I say all, but semantically thinking in English, really. So value and values as verb, but also the values as in third-person noun, or also like in the past, or assessment value, valued, valuable, etc. So out of the 142 policies, 82, they mention value or their conjugations. So this is an example. So most of you are familiar with research data management policies, probably. In some of the policies, you have sometimes an executive summary, preface, or something like that. We see here in the ARDC University that point 4 in the summary we see mentioned. Data with acknowledged long-term value must be preserved. Right? So to give you an idea of what the chunks database look like, are basically all those paragraphs. Right? So, and then we take that chunk from all that policy, we take it in consideration. And then afterwards, well, it was a qualitative analysis. So this is how the database looked like, where you have a policy chunk per row. You have the section where that chunk appeared, the value target. I'm going to tell you in one second what the value target is, and some other qualitative things. So I say that there was a qualitative analysis because we literally look at the 146 chunks, right? So as you can imagine, it's way easier to look at 146 paragraphs than 140 policies, right? So I guess we can agree on that. So for instance, in the second chunk of Cardiff Metropolitan University, we see that the chunk, the target value is on data, and it's mentioned a conditional declaration, and I'm going to tell you in 1 second what that is. If long-term value, and then we make an assessment of how value is mentioned in the sentence. We break it down into qualitative pieces. Value assessor, value beneficiary, the value predicate, the value conditional declaration, and the target. Most of the times, actually, where value was mentioned in policies was in the introduction or background or in the preamble of the policy, right? As well as in the general provisions or guiding principles of the policy. Not all the policies, but most of them, they have some sort of, principles of this policy. What are the values of the institution, therefore, the principles of the policy, etc. And then you have some other sections all the way down to, say, roles and responsibilities and research collaborations on which value is mentioned. Now, value is not only associated with data, as mentioned in the paragraphs or in the texts. From all those chunks, 122 were associated to data, to research data specifically. Some other value mentions were associated to samples, associated materials, or research outputs. For instance, our research data management policy, we say research outputs as in general are valuable, right? Not necessarily data. But some other policies, they would, come up with sentences like, societal values, and that's why we're doing research data management, etc. There was one case where it mentioned that digital repositories are valuable, right? One mention. But also we start, in order to get deeper into the analysis and say, okay, what are the value mentions on research data, and what do we want the scope to be? We also started to, filter out a couple of things, like for instance, things that are not value propositions, and a value proposition, as I mentioned, is something like data is valuable because blah, blah. So we exclude things like normative values or just definitions, Like for instance, in the University of Cambridge ARDM policy framework, it mentions something like, that students and research staff, they should manage and share the research data they produce in order to maximize the potential for research produced by the University of Cambridge in support of the university's core values and missions, you see. So value is not associated towards a target object, but more like definition or normative values, right? So we exclude those things. There were a couple. And we were left in that data set that you saw, that Excel spreadsheet, we were left with two types of value propositions. The first value proposition type would be something like declarative, right? So data or research data is valuable, because some predicate, right? So that same pattern came across tens of chunks. And then you have the second type, the conditional value, that would mention something like, if certain conditions are met, then data should be, or should this happen, right? The patterns were like mainly those two, really. So how then, and I'm going to show you like in a more quantitative way how those value propositions are actually mentioned. So how are those data value declarations formed? So to give you an example here, so you have in the left-hand side the value declaration. You have three subtypes. So data is valuable, data is a valuable asset, data have a long-term value. So that's what you see on the left-hand side. And then you have a bunch of value predicates. Those are the columns that you see. So how would you read this graph, for instance? You read that data is valuable, and then you see in the fourth column, because validate research findings, right? So that's how you read it. So you can read data is valuable because supports research science and knowledge. How many policies mention that? 5, right? So data is valuable because it supports academic principles. How many mentions of that? 3. Now, you can start, already starting to see how actually broad that is, right? So in all those data value declarations, data is valuable, therefore should be retained. Actually, you're telling me nothing, So if I'm reading policy, I see that, okay, those are kind of the principles of management of the university, should be retained, but you're not really giving me any guidelines. Oh, well, that goes for discussion. But what we want to highlight here is many of those universities and research organizations is the way they phrase value in their policy documents or protocols. So for instance, that first one, just to get one chunk, kind of out of the way, data is valuable because supports research science and knowledge. That's exactly what we saw in the UCL ARDM policy. UCL considers the research data generated by its members as a valuable research output, an asset to the institution, and critical contribution to the knowledge economy. Yeah. One example, and then we can see, basically this chunk across the whole matrix. The second type, how our conditional value propositions form. We have a little bit more variety. So in many policies, we see this configuration if some best practices are followed, like for instance, if you practice FAIR principle, then data should be preserved. If you practice, good data storage, then value is added. See, we see that a lot, actually, that, if continuing value, that's the third one from bottom to top. If continuing value, then should be preserved. If continuing value, should be published or shared if continuing value should remain accessible. And here I want to mention that all those value predicates, we can definitely, you know, what do we mean with preserving, archiving, publishing? Are all not those things actually overlapping? We're putting it in different value propositions because that's how explicitly the policies mention it, right? So again, we're just making an account of what is mentioned. So the highest one is, well, at least this one. So in many policies, I actually, you know, you read through them, and in some occasions it looks like a shameless copy-paste, which in terms of policy, I think that's, you know, that's correct, right? So just like the law, you know, you are based on certain things that worked in the past or in other organizations that follow your principles. In this case would be if long-term value, then data should be preserved. Then it comes really to the philosophical question that, you know, Susanne was asking, you know, okay, so if long-term value then should be preserved, but who assesses the long-term value, right? So my policy is telling me that if my data set that I'm publishing is long-term value, how do I preserve it, you know? And who assesses that? Myself, management, IT? I don't know. In the same qualitative analysis of all the chunks, in the value proposition, you always have, well, most of the time you have some sort of a beneficiary, right? So data is valuable because we saw, right, knowledge economy, because management thinks it's important, right? So we just discussed some of those things. Most of the time, the value beneficiary is not mentioned, right? So it's just, it is valuable for research, really, and that's it, you know, as a kind of a preamble, assessment. But then you have some other configurations and value beneficiary, like that they explicitly mentioned research data is valuable for the university, or if long-term value, then it should be preserved because benefits the research community, right? Because benefits society, right? So you have those value beneficiaries. If we go all the way to the bottom, we see some things like, you know, economy. There was one chunk that mentioned because it benefits, is valuable for the PI supervisor. The government was one mentioned. I have to say there was this one policy, right? So maybe it's biasing all those answers because there was this one policy that was incredibly inclusive. So this one policy mentioned is valuable because government, business, economy, academia is benefited to it. Okay, then, yeah. So what I'm trying to say is that these are not mutually exclusive categories, right? So one policy can include 6, 7 actors. So this is an example of one, you know, on the broad quotation mark side of categories, where it's mentioned that the value beneficiary, it's an agent, a future agent, like future research, right? Data is valuable because benefits future research. So for instance, you have, for example, university that mentions data that has acknowledged long-term value should be preserved to retain accessible and usable for future research. This one line, it actually appears a lot, right? So in that same pattern, right? So we just saw that data that has long-term value. So that's basically, you know, if long-term value. You see? So that data has acknowledged. So like if there's a condition embedded there, then should be preserved, right? So we see that in the first one, should be preserved, right? So that repeats like at least 17 times. Another example that I find, quite noticeable to actually mention, because all the value proposition, in a way, we are seeing them from a positive side of, you know, kind of, there's some sort of positive value or something. In this particular one, this particular pattern, we see if no further value, then should be destroyed. Right? So that one instance is kind of the, you know, if there is some sort of assessment and there's no value, then should be destroyed, because maybe, you know, as Susanne mentioned, the IT department wants to charge for storage. So if no value, just destroy it. And it's mentioned a couple of times. Data that do not substantiate published research findings and do not have long-term value should be disposed of when they no longer serve a purpose. Right? One last one. Who assesses the value? Right? So as we mentioned, so we have the value proposition, conditionals, and in many cases, not always, we see the value beneficiary. In a sub-fraction of those cases, there's even someone that will decide what that value is. This is a minority. This is somewhere around 15% of all the chunks that mention value. But still, you will see configurations like that example I'm pointing out. You see the value proposition. Data is a valuable asset because it's expensive to produce. That's one of the value propositions. University of the West England, they mention research data is a valuable asset, which is expensive to produce, and sometimes cannot be reproduced. Therefore, expert researchers to effectively manage research data, right? So at least there's one university that you know, mentions that is valuable because it literally just costs us a lot of money, right? And who's saying that? Who's you know, coming up with that? Well, university management, because those were the authors of the policy. So in the value assessor, we see on the column side, university management. We mention here alignment to frameworks and norms. What we mean with that is that there are some policies, we don't have the full picture here, but there are some policies that they actually mention some sort of a regulatory framework. Like say, because of the UK archive laws, we need to do that, right? So that's alignment with some normative framework. In some occasions, the value is assessed by the researcher. So some preliminary conclusions, and then kind of we can come back to the discussion of, you know, what value is and who assesses it, and how are we going to, from these very broad definitions to actionable value assessment. Many policies actually mention value, 57% mentions, mainly in the introduction of the general policy statements. So we see, you know, more often that there is some sort of pattern that says that, you know, research data management is valuable, and then it's kept there, like on the broad level. Data is mainly that one is logical, to be fair, because we're talking about research data management policies, right? So, but still, so there are, if we see it from the flip side, there's 16% of the cases where in a research data management policies, some other thing is valuable, right? Like samples, like research outputs. There is a couple of policies that I mentioned. This policy is valuable. Really, therefore you should follow research data management best practices, right? Those ones are funny examples, but yeah. And the actors mainly remain implicit. So beneficiaries or assessors of value are just unstated. You know, they just keep it broad. You know, it's kind of an unwritten rule that research data management is valuable, and that's why we're having this conversation right now, because we are in the broad level, right? Yeah, we know it's valuable. We had a hard time to assess, like, is there anything that is low value? But then, who assesses it, and for whom, right? So I guess, yeah, that is a conversation that we should start having. I'm going to hand back to...
You first. Are there any questions or feedback, comments?
Also, you can, in the document, start asking questions. Yeah, we have actually plenty of time for discussion and questions. Please, sir.
So it's Kevin Ashley, the DCC again. So I hate to be negative, but I think there's a lot of things you need to know about what you've been looking at in those policies. So I'll begin. I saw there's quite a lot of policies from UK universities in that sample you looked at. That's not surprising, because they almost all have one, and they're almost all public. What perhaps you don't realise is that the reason why you see so much repetition is that all those policies were derived from 3 templates. I know that because our organisation helped them all do it. We started from looking at organisational types. There are some that are very rule-driven. There are some that are all about policies about aspiration. So we chose templates that fit those things and basically said, pick the one that looks most like other university policies. And okay, change a few of the words so it makes it look like it's yours. But that's why you see so much duplication. What's also not apparent from this is one of the reasons perhaps you don't see the value mentioned as much as you'd like is that in many cases, and I know one example from the Netherlands, from TU Delft, for instance, the value is, that's kind of a given. The whole reason we have a policy is because we know the data is valuable. So the policy doesn't need to say that. The policy doesn't need to say anything about the value. That was what informed the decision in some university committee to go and write a policy. So TU Delft, I know, for instance, their marketing to researchers was all about your data is treasure. They gave out little wooden treasure chests to people to demonstrate this. So it was fundamental to their thinking. And I think also, you've commented often, I think it's true to say that although the policies that do talk about value often don't describe how you assess that or who does it. And I think that's because in many organisations that's not what policies are seen as being meant to do. That's an operational, tactical thing that will be addressed in a document somewhere else. So policy simply says this needs to happen. And no, it doesn't say how, and it doesn't say who, because that will be done somewhere else. But in some organisations, it will all be in there. I could say more, but I'll stop now and let someone on.
No, that's that's correct, right? So everything mentioned here is well, basically, if we want to make value assessment operational, we need to start somewhere. And kind of what we had in mind, it was like, okay, if we start to ask, how do we assess value? The first question from the community will be like, what do the policies say, right? So kind of this whole analysis was to take that question out of the way, not necessarily get, insights that are logical, because when reading the policies, looking at the analysis, 99% of the things are just, logical, right? But it's more like, let's try to gather all the information we have so that we can have a conversation and address all the elephants in the room, really. Please.
So with that idea of giving out a little treasure chest, like that just leads to data hoarding. Like data might be valuable, but my question for you guys is like, the life cycle you had didn't talk about disposal, and you talk about IT costs being a huge issue here. Like, yeah, it's easy to hoard data, but it does come up against physical constraints. Does, in your opinion, data value depreciate? Like every asset depreciates over time. Does value depreciate, and is there a need for policies to talk about when you hit a threshold, just get rid of it? Because it's usually not treasure. And the example I'd give is I was the person who asked about the Menti survey. Like the Menti survey today probably has value for about 6 weeks, but next year it's like, just get rid of it. Like just delete it. So my question is, like, does value depreciate?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm writing it down as a question. I guess, we don't have the answers actually. We have the questions as well. And we are welcoming questions, right? So, yeah, the data value depreciation is It's actually a good one, right? So when we, I mean, we're in another working group working about research software, and one of the distinctions that we make is that, you know, research software depreciate, but data not, right? But then that's very highly debatable, right? So data does not appreciate. I don't know. So it's a question. We are writing it down. I really don't know the order. I think, yeah.
I am Andrea, DMP Online Service Manager, and a colleague of Kevin. A few months ago, I've been occasioned to be down in Birmingham, and we're speaking about the UK RIDE, which is the main founder in UK, speaking about research data management. And we were speaking exactly about time. And during the presentation, you said that it's time, for example, when it starts to become a cost, and well, we can read off. But there are some disciplines where they look data down 5,000 years ago or 14,000 years ago. And with all the respect that the comment says, maybe the Menti that we have here has value for 6 weeks, maybe has value for 6 weeks now, but maybe in 100 years ago, in the future, or 1,000 years in the future, it could be so valuable because what we wrote inside that questionnaire, Menti, is so important for the next generation. So time is not money. Time is life. Time is a factor that could be, is probably one of the value that we should have considered.
No, that's a great point. Like the predisposition that time might give value, right? And some policies, some actors, they start to see it that way. Like we are constrained to assess value now because part of those value characteristics actually come from the future, right? So, yeah, right? So it's like, how am I going to assess if it's going to be valuable in 20 years? It's a contesting situation. Please.
Hi everyone, my name's Katie Hannon, I'm from CSIRO. My question is for everybody here because I have also been thinking about all of these sorts of things and thinking about what is value, when is value determined. So at CSIRO we are subjected to a National Archives of Australia retention and disposal sort of policy that talks about data from significant science should be kept permanently. But the value of data changes over time. So if we're talking long tail, something might not have value or not have impact in the first 6 months or 6 weeks. It might be 5 years or 10 years or 15 years. So I have questions about how often should you be conducting appraisals or reappraisals on the value of the data? Because if you put a retention period on something, you might put a retention period at 4 years, but hey, at 3.5 years or at some point. So that's where my questions lie, and this is for everybody because I am joining this journey and I don't want to do it alone. Thank you.
Well, thanks to you. That is a great question. How often should we conduct appraisals, right? So it's like, do we come up with a community heuristics for appraisals, right? 5 years, 10 years, what characteristics? Yeah, how do you come up with those things? Do you have the record of where were the hands up?
Well, Marcin Wichorowski, Institute of Oceanology, Polish Academy of Sciences. In my opinion, it depends on data. Volatility of data is related to the domain of data. So if you have environmental data, this data is precious and the price of data rise according to time, because old data you can compare, for instance, for climate research, old data you can compare with present data, and the value of old data is hard to underestimate, in my opinion. But in other disciplines, maybe storing data eternally makes no sense because this data is losing value according to time. And also, it depends if you can collect this data or recollect this data once again, or if it is impossible. If you have environmental data, it's impossible to recollect this data if you lose it, because even if you go to the same spot and take data once again, it will be much different data because it will be different time, and conditions are also different. So.
No, those are correct. I guess we're starting to see how, different actors, like for instance, in your position, you mentioned a couple of things. If we lose it, we lose value, right? So you become one of the assessors, right? Some other things, some other stakeholders, they have some other principles in mind on how to assess value. You just mentioned yours, right? So we're starting to see certain patterns of value assessment. That's great.
Can we just have one next so we can continue?
Yes. Gentleman over here, sorry to cut you off, but to have participation. Awesome.
So a slightly different take on this. So some years ago, I was asked to value the books in our library for insurance purposes. So then I got into a conversation around valuing data for insurance purposes and our national collections. And historically, our finance team did put a value against it. So our national collections were valued at 35 million New Zealand dollars. And for some reason, they came up with a value of 3 million for a data. I have no idea where that came from. But subsequently, it was removed because it was so difficult to calculate, and for all the reasons we said, you can't get like-for-like replacement. So it was dropped off the insurance policies. But the flow-on from that is that it didn't come up in the enterprise risk assessment until I added it back in recently. And it got to it means that basically we know more about the value of our physical assets and therefore how to insure them and what needs to be invested in them to maintain them than we do in our data, and therefore we don't put it into our data. So just a slightly different view on value, and maybe go and look at your insurance policies if you can get access to them.
This is really wonderful. Judith, and then we close up with that.
Thank you. I'm actually happy that you just said that, because there's another suggestion that I might want to give you for maybe a follow-up study on that corpus. But Kevin here said that the policies were basically made from templates and that everyone needs to make them, blah, blah, blah. What if we looked at what universities do, and what universities or institutions will say they do? Because indeed, policies are where you say you will do things, but then, for example, you said that TU Delft says that your data is a treasure and you should, that's the truth until someone needs to pay for something. So I used to / still work in a university where there is literally less than one data steward full-time equivalent for the whole 11 faculties. There are some other universities like TU Delft that have a strong data stewardship and data management infrastructure investment policy. So what if there could be a match or a mismatch between how value is stated, praised, and assessed in policies and what the universities and institutions are willing to invest, how much they actually are ready to pay, how many data stewards full-time equivalent, how many gigabytes of storage servers. To answer the time retention question, KU Leuven, for example, has a 10-year retention policy that was determined rather randomly, I would argue. But still, that also means that there's a commitment of leaving your data alone for 10 years on the servers, and I think that speaks to something. So yeah, maybe a cool follow-up would be to match those policies with investment strategies and how many data stewards they have, how many gigabytes, and how easy it is to access. Because, for example, at Liège, we are also coming up now with a payment policy for storage because we're running out. So, yeah.
This is wonderful.
And this is a little bit schizophrenic because I was literally asked to write a data policy about preservation, and at the same time, now the researchers, they have to pay for storage. Drives me nuts.
It's crazy. It's like, but I really like the suggestion of, the measuring the mismatch because between what they do versus what they say they do. Awesome. Thanks.
I will continue because actually what you're bringing up is also part of a discussion in other parts of this talk. So if we go back to the Danish project, as a reminder, what we want to do is define some sort of framework for the value of research data. What we have done so far is hold a number of workshops with our Danish National Data Management Network. We have initiated a literature review, but I have to admit it's ongoing. So I already could see, like, you're putting lots of resources in the comments, which I love. So if you know of any other interesting literature, please let us know. And what we also want to do is, and we have started, we are halfway in, interview round with all sorts of different stakeholders that you saw before mapped on this data life cycle. So, and also there, and we'll get back to that, if you have expertise in this area, we would love to interview you as well. So what have we gotten to so far? And I have to say it's very preliminary. We're really here today as a part of our investigation to get more opinions on this. Before I go that basically what we have tailored our type of questions onto is, first of all, can we distinguish between different types of data? I mean, how would we call it? And then what type of factors determine whether value is obtained and what the level of value is. So if we go to this first question, what we so far have kind of distilled from our different initiatives on value type, we have so far been able to identify 5 types, but again, it's an ongoing process. Maybe you have suggestions for different types or merging types, but so far we have identified what we call the cultural or societal value type. So the impact that research data can have on our cultural heritage. And the question one can ask is, what is the importance of the research data for our understanding of society now and in the future? And when we talk to our archivist colleagues, our librarian colleagues, that this is what we think is the type of value that they talk about. Of course, scientific value, so the contribution that the data make to support or further develop conceptual frameworks within a research discipline. So what's the importance of the data in advancing the field of research? And that is, of course, on the forefront of the minds of our researchers. And by the way, our researchers are not necessarily so interested in cultural and societal value. We have so far found out. It, again, depends on the discipline you're in. Market value, here the money comes in, so the economic significance of the data. For example, the direct financial gains to the project or some indirect impact on future value generation in society. The last one is, of course, a little bit more fluffy. But more concretely, you can ask, can the data be commercialized by the organization? Here we find that the majority of our researchers really don't think about this value type at all. It is the researchers that are in the applied research field or, for example, translational medicine or are really involved in producing spin-offs, of course, they are more interested. And it's our IPR specialists and our research leadership that is heavily invested in this, and we can see that we have lots of innovation strategies and plans at our university, for example. Reproduction value or production value, that's basically the resources it requires to create the data or recreate the data when they are lost. And with that can mean anything from the funding that you needed to do this project, but also the expertise you needed, the equipment that you used, any resources. And here you can, of course, ask your question, can the data be recreated at all? And then another type of value that we, and of course the production value is something our IT department is very much thinking about, the costs of it all, of storage. And then my colleagues in the information security team and our research leadership are very much thinking about compliance value, as we call it. And that's kind of an inverse value type. It is the impact of non-compliance to ethical, legal, or contractual obligations positively correlated with value. Basically means the bigger the negative consequence it has when your data get lost or there is a confidentiality breach, the higher this data seems to be valued. I hope that makes sense. So what are the consequences for the data providing organization, human participants, cultural heritage, populations, animals, and ecosystem when something happens to these data? So that's a kind of an inverse, but I actually wanted to capture it as well as part of this this suite of types that we have so far been able to identify. So, of course, I would like to hear from you. What do you think about these value types? Does that resonate with you? Can you see your researchers or the people you work with kind of thinking about these different data types? Or is there anything missing in these value types? So, yeah, I would first and foremost like to have some feedback. Yeah, I think you were first. There's a mic on the way.
Wolf Kral, Helmholtz-Zentrum Berlin. Just one tiny remark on the scientific value. I would not only look at future research, but the data has also value to assess the validity of existing. If it underpins a paper, you want to assess whether the conclusions of the paper are valid, and therefore you might need to look at the data that has been used to create these claims.
Yeah, good point. Thank you.
You can write also asynchronously in the boxes of data types.
Yeah, and it's just example there, but you can also just put your feedback in that box.
Hi there. I work in an organisation that does public and commercial research. So where would you put reputational value?
That's a really good point.
Both
that was actually our sixth value that we killed.
And also for the scientist?
Yeah, we actually had that reputational value. So, but that's also kind of an inverse, or that can be both a positive value, but also like when things go wrong, damage to reputation. We actually had that as a sixth one, but then in our national networks there were all sorts of arguments for that being kind of relevant for all other, that could be nested under the other value types. But I don't know, it's good that you bring it up. We had it originally, so I may reintroduce it. Thanks. Yeah?
Hi, Richard Ferris from ARDC. I wrote my PhD on value
great.
in the business school about why do consumers adopt new technology, and as part of the methodology you just find out their stories, and they spoke very easily about value. Value in the methodology, you're trying to find the language that the people use, and value was a word that they were able to talk about very easily, and my job was to unpack what they meant when they said value.
Well, that's super relevant. We'll come and talk to you afterwards.
It was very complex.
Yeah.
So and part of the methodology was trying to saturate, which means talk to lots and lots of different people until you run out of variation. So I ended up with 12 dimensions of value. This is about buying a phone, so going from an old phone to a smartphone. Yeah. What did the phone mean to them? And then trying to understand the process they went through. It's a complex, it changes over time. But there is a rich value literature that comes from lots of different schools. Economics, marketing talks about value.
And what we have found so far, and that is a bit like if we go into the scientific literature, I find a lot of value discussions in relation to the FAIR principles. If fair, then value, right? The type of value you find, you talk about are different types of literature, and sometimes like the non-compliance value, it's really hard to find in literature at all. I suspect they may be in information security reports and other types of reports. So yeah, I have to admit, we are still continuing on the literature search.
So I put a bunch of literature links in there for you.
Perfect. Thank you.
First of all, I might have missed the first minute or two. Are we going to get a link to this document?
Yeah, Susanne, yeah, but can you go to the slides? Yeah, I think, yeah, go there. One back. Yeah, you can.
There's the short URL.
I'll get that in a sec. The other, the question I wanted to ask though was, with all of these dimensions of value type, where do you see sentimental values sticking in? Because we talk about. I'm serious. It would be lovely if we still had the Library of Alexandria, and we want to keep everything all the time. But again, it comes to data hoarding. Is like we're always going to hit. Constraints.
But would sentimental value not be cultural value in that respect, or?
Well, no. I think sentimental value, like we see it in hoarding. Like sentimental value is like. I'll give you an example. Like I used to work at the Australian Bureau of Statistics. I was fortunate enough to be a census collector. I got my dream allocation and I census collected in the snowfields of Australia. So I skied all day and then I walked around and I collected the census in the evening. So, and my hands got really, really cold. So I couldn't knock on the doors. It actually hurt my hands to do. So I grabbed a rock and I had a really nice river polished rock and I knocked on the door and I still have that rock.
Yeah.
It's worth nothing. Right? We all have stuff. And, you know, you get to that point in your life and you go, one day I'm going to be at a box and somebody's just going to turf all this stuff and you want to keep it, right? I want to keep my rock. You know, there's a bucket of stuff where I'm like, just pack, when you box me up, just fill it with all my stuff. But we do that with data. Like, you know, the Menti survey, Menti's going to delete it at some stage. In, you know, 12 months, they're going to go, this was a free survey, delete.
Yeah.
Like, I think sentimental value is something we have to talk about in the sense that, you know, we just keep data, hoping that maybe it'll be useful at some point in the future. But, you know, a sentiment analysis survey of horse and buggy carts from 150 years ago might be interesting, but is it valuable?
Yeah. Good. We take one question, sorry, and then we continue, but so that we go through all. Thank you. And I just one comment I want to say is that I think that value type probably clashes with your leadership's value type, and yeah. So which value type then determines what happens to the data? I don't know. Yeah. Good.
Thank you. Ryan McAllister, CSIRO, ex-ABS, and I'm in the same camp as you, but I think a counterpoint coming back to the policy is that there's a lot of people who want to delete data but don't have the confidence because they think they have to keep it. So actually having a proper framework can support both sides, the hoarders, but also the people who are kind of ruthless deleters who keep it because they feel they have to.
Super.
I guess that's one of the key points, right? So the operationalization of value is important because it's all logical.
Talk on the microphone.
Yeah, the whole problem of operationalization of value assessment, right? Because I guess we all agree that, you know, data is valuable, right? But in order to, you know, what goes, what not, and when, there is where it comes the nuance, right? So.
Yeah, I will continue walking through this a little bit. How do I go to the? Yeah, to the presenter, to the big screen. Sorry. Yeah, thanks. Yeah. So, okay, different types, and we will continue to think about that. So if you later also have more suggestions, please tell us. But now what about level? And here there were some questions that we asked. Can data sets by themselves have value? Or does the value of the data depend on the way the data are used or the context it's being used in? So what influences this level of value? So we started, of course, on the basis of the interviews, the literature we've read so far, the workshops we've done so far, tried to distinguish between intrinsic factors, so factors inherent to the data set itself, independent of context and use, versus extrinsic factors, so factors that are context dependent and relate to how, where, and by whom the dataset is used. And I just want to show you some examples of these factors that we have gotten to so far. For example, intrinsic, the uniqueness of the data, so how novel the data is. The reliability of the data can set value, I guess, to the data set. So the degree to which the data are collected via methods that are quality controlled, peer-reviewed, and assessed to be appropriate to address the research questions. The representativeness, as we call it, so the degree to which the data cover all relevant factors needed to address the research question. Something about the way the data are organized, so the degree to which data are organized in clear, logical, and systematic manner, and widely accepted file formats are used. And of course, we already here had the debate, is unstructured data valueless? Not necessarily, but I guess the way the data are presented can add to its value. And then something, of course, about the metadata component, so the richness of the embedded metadata and the degree of adherence to metadata standards, vocabularies, ontologies can, of course, influence value, or at least that's what we... Yeah, which, and I mean, now I'm basically summarizing, but I think a lot of this actually came by in the feedback that you gave us before, which is great. And then when you look at extrinsic factors, you can think about things like relevance. Yeah. So the degree to which data are aligned with current needs, different types of needs. And then this is somehow related. We were struggling a little bit. Demand, the number of stakeholders for whom the data has value. Of course, there's a relationship between demand and relevance. But I guess there can also be there can also be demand with low relevance. And I don't know, so we kept it separate for now. Exclusivity, so the abundance of the data when the data are in high demand. Innovation or technological compatibility, and here's also where the time factor came in that you have mentioned before. So the degree to which data can be exploited using available technologies. So we can basically do something very new to data that are 300 years old now because we have new technology. And there's a time factor in that as well. Yeah, or the other way around, yeah, right. Accessibility, so also part of the FAIR suite. So the way you make the data available, of course, adds value to the data. And then here, what was actually just mentioned in the comments before, is a bit of a wild card, but again, also reputation of the source. So the degree to which there's trust in the producer of the data, we believe also could set some value to the data. So what do you think? Do you have any comments on these factors? Or do you have any examples of data sets that by themselves, independent of their context, have high value? Or do you have examples of data sets where the level of value has changed due to changes in extrinsic factors? And Joseph, you had your hand up before, so.
Yes, Joseph Gum. We've been talking a lot about, or implying a positive scale of value or deprecating value to, say, a zero value. But what about negative value? What does negative value look like? And who thinks things are negative value? Yeah. For example, there was the Harvard University social researcher talking about truth and trustworthiness, and they got let go and sued and everything because it turned out she faked all of her data. Yeah. And should that be kept and used by other researchers using knowingly bad data? You can argue that has a negative data value.
So I guess the reputation factor actually can go both ways.
But if you combine that researcher that faked her data with other researchers that fake their data and you use it for fraud detection or some sort of p-value analysis or something, then you might start to have positive value from that data again. So the context of all of it. You're taking something that was obviously fraudulent. Yeah. That has no intrinsic value. It's completely fabricated. And you're trying to justify that's hoarding. But financial providers are looking at fraud all the time. Yeah, I mean, this is just an example that's constructed.
Thanks for that comment. Yeah.
I mean, there's real environmental costs of having big data sets, so to me that's quite negative. And, you know, we got researchers that do hoard data, and they think, our organisation should just pay more money and storage is cheap. But they're all quite idealistic, and you can actually explain it in terms of, koalas died and carbon and so forth. Yeah. I'm serious. That wasn't actually meant to be a joke.
Sorry.
They're one of our favourite animals. Thank you very much.
Sorry.
Security.
Security. Sorry. Yeah, but good point. Yeah. Any other suggestions? Yeah.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Emma from the Australian Research Data Commons, but I'm also co-chair of the Evaluation of Research Interest Group. So there's definitely a lot of things that we can chat about.
Yeah.
But one thing that I've been thinking about a lot when we've been talking is just the context of evaluating the data. So obviously in the context of the valuation of research, you know, obviously researchers are being assessed on their performance, and if we're advocating for data as research outputs, then there's the element of assessing that data versus what a lot of this conversation has been about in terms of preservation and retention and disposal. So I do think there might be some nuance between the factors, the value factors and these factors you're talking about now.
So value of a data set for a person's own, for a person themselves, rather, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
It depends on the positionality of where this assessment comes from. Right?
And it's got the time element as well that you've been talking about a lot, because, you know, researchers are getting assessed annually. That data set, does it get assessed once at the point of their career, at that one point in their career when they collected the data? In 5 years' time, is it being reused and therefore it's really valuable?
Yeah.
And do they then not get any credit for that in their career progression? So anyway, something to think about.
Thank you. And can you please write some of these comments? I mean, I will try to remember in. Great, thank you. I would like to continue with the last part. Is okay. So basically, what we aim is to provide some sort of guidance for different stakeholders on how to think about value. What that looks like, I don't really know yet. But of course, it should be usable. And I brought a case for us to discuss. And the case is happening at my own university. It's about physical samples, and it was kicked off by another disastrous case that happened at a Swedish university. So I think 2 years ago, at a Swedish university, who I'll not name openly, but you can look it up, over the Christmas period, they lost quite a lot of their samples in a freezer. And as you can see here, one of their employees, well, let's just read it. Research samples collected over decades at a Swedish medical university were destroyed when a freezer malfunctioned during the Christmas holidays, the institution has said. Sahlberg said no official estimate of the value of the samples lost had been made, but it was easily in the millions. Those worst affected are those researching leukemia. They have gathered samples from patients over as much as 30 years. So that kicked off an initiative at my own university, and I will talk about that soon. But I already had a question looking through this publication. How do they get to these millions, right? We're talking about physical samples. So I just leave that there for you to reflect on, and then we talk about it later. But how do they get to a money estimate is what we're interested about. So now to a case at my university. So that kicked off. Our information security people saw this and thought, that millions actually helped them make a case with our own university leadership, as this is an area that needs action. The situation for us is that at our university, we have hundreds of freezers on various campuses, and these freezers are typically purchased through individual research funding. And a consolidated overview of our freezers is missing because they are so individually bought. Our building administration does not have a list. But we have increasing threats of hybrid warfare. In Europe, we are all really scaling up our information security attempts. So we want to now make an activity where we try to prevent data loss due to freezer malfunction when our electricity goes down by ensuring that there's diesel generators activated in case of power loss. So the building admin now wants to have a list of freezers that in an economically viable way, in other words, we don't have money to have hundreds of diesel generators, so we need to basically link diesel generators to the freezers that have the most valuable samples. So the exercise we have to go through now, first kind of what I call reactive. We right now have to ask researchers to identify samples of high value that right now require additional protection against power outages. And proactive, the university wants to use this exercise to define some overarching principles for determining which samples, or freezers in this way, have high priority as part of a security contingency plan for power failures. So I would like to pick your brain in the last 6 minutes. What would how would you advise the researchers to determine which of their freezer samples have high value? Like from which parameters? And how do you think the interests of the researchers and the university management align or not on this? Yeah?
Will any researchers say their research is of low value? That's my question.
You think no researchers, okay. But I mean, for now, there has not been any, there has not been any perceived consequences to not thinking about where to put the data. We are introducing to them that scenario now, so they actually have to... They will have to sort through them and place some of them one place and others another place.
Hi there, Richard from ARDC. There's this kind of risk and return aspect to it. So I used to work at a power station, and the engineers would come to me and say, we need to fix this. And I would say, what will happen if this breaks? And they'll say, oh, the power station might be offline for 6 hours while we fix it. And what does that cost? So trying to turn, and then we would do like what's the probability of this happening? So it was like a probability and consequences, and then you can calculate an expected value. So that's similar. So but the researchers think about the value from their perspective. Marx has this idea of a labour theory value, how much of your time has gone into creating something. So theoretically, you have to reproduce that time if it was lost to do it again. So you can use those kind of calculations to calculate with.
Yeah, but so you're basically referring to what we talk about production value. And I mean, I would say scientific value is also something that the researchers kind of talk from. But I mean, you're referring to production value mostly. Is that what the researchers would think about? Or
How much of their time is going to create.
Yeah.
So that's why every researcher thinks their research is valuable.
Yeah. But what if they have samples that they worked on for only 1 week?
Yeah, but then you've got input value and output value. So the community may see that as very highly valuable. For instance, might have very nominal results.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not just about the time investment, right?
That's in and what comes out.
Yeah. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
Michelle Barker from the Research Software Alliance. Can you give us an update in 6 months on how the university decides this, please?
Yeah, if we have figured it out, and that's why that's why if there are people here that have been working on these type of issues, we really would like to talk to you and hear about your work. That can hopefully help us. I want to kind of maybe close off by asking do you have any other use cases that we also could think about where these value assessments are important. Here there's something about money and security, but do you have other use cases? And if you have any opinions on what the format of guidance is that we could give, is this like a decision tree or an AI tool? Yeah, of course, yeah.
There was one more. In Queensland, I was involved with a public sector project to create a balance sheet for the government.
Yeah, just maybe give a mic. Yeah, thank you.
Richard from ARDC again. One of the things they struggled with was, for instance, the bridges over the river. How much should we value the bridges at? And some of them have been built, getting on for 100 years ago. And the accountants came up with this idea of deprival value. If it was taken away from you, what would you do? And so if we took the bridge away, would we put another bridge there? Well, like if it's blown over in a cyclone and the value was the expense you would have to go to in that situation. So for some things you would just go, let's start again, or you can build something much more modern, or
so it's not necessarily replacement cost, but it could also lead to alternative solutions.
There might be alternatives. Yeah. So if you lost the freezer, then can we download the data from a protein data bank or something?
Yeah. Yeah. Good point. Thank you. Yeah, I just want to close off by, again, reiterating, if you have any relevant initiatives, reports, literature, or you have been involved in that, let us know. We would very much like to contact you. And if you want to follow or have a chat with us further about this later, also let us know. And yeah. And if you want to have the session notes, I think we'll maybe just email them anyway out to everyone that has written their name in the session notes. Yeah, well, let's do that. Yeah. Thanks a lot.